See, when you hear the term marginlands, what comes to mind? Places that are far off, places that are on the fringes of our geography, of our country. Um, so we want to bring you right here to where we are sitting right now, to Kerala. In fact, to about 4 kilometers from here, where, and we want to talk about the sea coast. Arti and I, some time ago, we had done a walk along a part of this coastline when we saw certain things, and we wanted to tell you stories about those places and those things that we observed. So, Arti.
Um, Thank you, and thanks to everybody who's come. Um, so, margin lands, the word itself, does not really refer to a place or a type of place. It really is anything, at least the way I imagined it. It's anything that was at the edge of our psyche, something that was not really top of mind, not front and center, something always kind of lurking at the margins. And it could even be something as it could even be your neighbor or your neighbor's house or your neighborhood, which could be a margin land, only because it was at the corner of the psyche of the people who developed that place. They did not really pay attention to this, which is why maybe there are issues now. And to the point that Prem was talking about, Kerala, God's own country, which has got such a long coastline, for example, has 63% of its beaches eroding. So 63% of its coastline is eroding. And that, for some reason, then was not really in the forefront of the people who were planning Kerala's development or tourism or whatever it is, and that therefore now is suffering, and so that then became a margin land. And what Prem was talking about was that what we noticed as we moved up the coast is that every time there was some kind of an obstruction at the coastline, so some kind of some architectural protrusion from the coastline, there was accretion of sand south of it, and that sand would not reach the north, and therefore there was severe erosion north of that. And in talking to people, we found out that at the Virinjam coast, port, for example, everything north of that port is severely eroded, and eroded to such an extent that the beaches are gone. We met people where they had bought the house when the house was 5 lanes away from the ocean, from the sea. 5 lanes away. There were 5 rows of houses before their own. And today, half of that person's house is gone because the sea has come all the way in. And now, what exactly is happening? It's so easy for us to say that the sea has come in or the sea has swallowed. Is that really what has happened? What ended up happening was that there is something called a longshore drift on this coast, and where the sediments carried by the ocean currents, they build these beaches, and it comes from the south to the north. And when you put this kind of a protrusion, obviously it can't flow beyond that, and it comes to a stop there. And so the beaches north of those protrusions don't get built up. That's one reason. There are several other reasons also. But then that's what we realized. And we realized that there were so many these kinds of man-made, whether it's sea walls or whether it's a breaker for a big port coming up just right here in Trivandrum, for example. There are so many reasons that we are causing this erosion ourselves by decisions that we are taking. And that then got us thinking, because what is a beach? This is a place which has got such a long coastline, and it's full of fishermen. And the fishermen push off from the beach. But if there's no beach to push off from, where are they going to launch their boats from? Right? So fishermen we spoke to, they said, now we have to take our boats and go all the way to Guruvayur, right? And they have to push off from there. So it's just that the whole way of life is changing because of certain decisions that have been made without thinking about the landscape, without keeping the landscape in mind.
Yes. So think about it this way. Back in the 70s, actually 71, there was a communal clash in a place called Virinyam, which is part of Trivandrum district. Uh, Two communities were fighting for the right to land their boats in that particular place. The resolution was they decided to divide that section of beach into two. One community takes the area to the right and another community takes the area to the left. In fact, there is a street. On this side, it's all one community. On that side, it's all another community, right? Then they decided that since this is going to be a harbor for literally hundreds of boats, they needed to build a sort of breakwater. They needed to build a shelter for these boats because otherwise, in the monsoons, the boats will get damaged. So they built a wall, and then they built a curved wall so that this was protected. From which is what Arati was talking about. To the left of that is an area called Adimalatura, where you find a nice big beach, and to the right, you find the beach is gone. Arti talked about the beach itself going and what happens immediately, therefore. What are we doing? Uh, to give you an example, when we were here on this coastline walk, I remember the first day, Arti and I went for dinner in Kovalam on that promenade. Lots of seafood restaurants. I picked a seafood restaurant because I, I think a day spent not eating fish is a waste of time. I sat there, I got my fish curry, and it turned out to be fish that was farmed in Andhra Pradesh and brought to Kerala. And I'm sitting on the Kerala coast. That speaks to what Arati was talking about, the fish. But there are other consequences, right? What are you doing? The beach is eroding. It's an act of nature. So you're building walls. What happens because of that, Arati? And that's again something that we saw, right?
Right. Again, there's accretion on one side, and then there's major erosion on the other side. And so people again lose their beaches. It becomes rocky, completely full of rocks. That's what they do. The government comes and puts rocks and walls and things like that, and there's just no way to push off from. You can't launch your boat from there, right? So basically that part, and actually I didn't realize that there was no projector here. I had some photographs to show you of Google Maps, in fact, that you can see where in 2003 you can see where the beach was and how much of a beach was there. And then you just drag the slider and you'll see in 2020 that beach is gone. Forget the beach being gone, a bunch of land has also been, it's just been lost to the sea. And you can see that coincides with the building of the breaker to the south. So you can see the whole thing, and there's really, it's not even a debate anymore. That's exactly, and this is not to say that it is any one port, one company. I'm not taking names. It's not one government. Unfortunately, this has been happening over the years, and it's going to continue happening because it's a mindset. Marginlands is really necessarily a mindset. It's something that is not front and center of policy making. Which is the landscape and the rhythms of the land and the seasons and so on. When you don't keep that in mind when you make your policy, you will have these issues. So it's really not anti-development or anti-one company or any one name or any one government. It's really a mindset, an ethic that we have lost, because of which we are finding these kinds of problems.
Yeah, and one of the things that Aarti talks about, writes about all the time is we see issues as isolated. So, okay, we have a problem. The beaches are getting eroded. We have a solution. We're building walls. Where the rock coming from? It's coming from the Western Ghats. It's coming from Kalpata. It's coming from Idukki, primarily. I'm a Kerala native. Until the last 10 years, previous to the last 10 years, and I'm not only a Kerala native, I've actually lived for a year in Sultan's Battery, which is right in the middle of the Western Ghats. There's no such thing as landslides. Now, every year, every monsoon, you have half a dozen landslides. The last one in Kalpata cost 40 lives and about 70 to 80 houses were destroyed. Why is that happening? Because you're taking away that rock and then You have
Yep.
the consequences. Then you have the consequences of the rivers. That's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. How something that is happening, a problem that is happening in one locality, which seems to be localized, actually reverberates right across a vast geography.
Yes, yes. It's interesting. I'll take a completely different example. We've been talking about Kerala all this time. I'm going to move us to the other end, in a way, to the northeast, where similarly there has been crazy mining for river rock. You know that smooth rock that we all have like whatever. There's been a lot of mining for river rock and river boulders and things like that. That's ostensibly to build roads because roads are needed to connect different parts of Arunachal Pradesh. Now the problem is when you mine river rock, for example, you're moving things from where the river is flowing, and that introduces changes in the way the river flows, and it changes the course of rivers. And what's happening there is one mining for river rock in one place changes the course of a river, which then finds a completely path of least resistance, comes completely in a different place, floods a region. And not only that, because you have taken out the river rock, you have released the sand from underneath it. So the river, which used to carry silt, which was fertile, now carries sand, which is inert. And that same thing, it changes course, it comes and it floods a place where it's not supposed to be, and it dumps the sand on rich paddy, which then means that people cannot farm there anymore. They up and leave, they go to a city. Our cities are bursting at the seams, as we all know. So, this is what Prem was talking about as the cascading effect. One decision taken in one place, whether it is to build a small seawall here, or whether it is to mine river rock there, or any amount of those things, and my book has got many more examples of such things. Those kinds of decisions can have cascading effects not only in that place where it's happening, but also as far as 800 kilometers away, upstream, downstream, this side, that side, all kinds of places. And that's essentially because everything is connected. We are a web, we are an interconnected web. And when you move something, or you remove something, or you disturb something, you tend to move a lot of things around it. And those things then can come back to bite us. So again, Marginlands it's something at the margins of our psyche, but it's not something far away. It might be happening geographically far away, but the repercussions come right back to us.
How many of you in the room are Keralites?
Oh,
Right. So yesterday, yeah, I think it was yesterday when we were driving from the airport to the hotel that we were staying at. My wife noticed something, that on a particular stretch of road there were multiple shops selling these interlocking tiles. You know what they are, right? I mean, we're paving the
paving
courtyards of our
tiles.
homes with those, and she was like, "Why are there so many shops selling the same thing?" She's not from Kerala. She didn't realize. Aha, nalla paattu. Uh, what she realized, I mean, what she didn't know was that once we went away from our old form of construction, the tiled homes and the front yards, which are kept bare and clean and all of that, we are now paving it all over. From the back wall to the front wall, every inch that is not covered by the house is paved, right? I wanted Aarti to talk about a particular fallout of this phenomenon, which is Kerala gets massive amounts of rain. It is blessed to get rain from both the monsoons. You have the Edavapadi and you also have the northeast monsoon impacting on Kerala, Chingam, Kanni, all of that. And 2 months after the monsoon, you have a drought situation, you have water shortage. There is a contrasting area which is in the deep desert. And Aarti has written beautifully about that in this particular book. I wanted you to first look at this dichotomy of a place that is water rich, struggling for water. Why is this happening, and what are the solutions?
So it's interesting. This thing that you talk about the tiles, I came across it when I first came to Kerala in 2014 2013, when I was just beginning work on this deep storytelling, and that's something that Dr. Ananta at that time, Lata Ananta, with the River Research Center here, she pointed it out to me, saying, when you go past, just look at all the houses, and they are paved with these concrete tiles or these tiles from compound wall to compound wall, from gate to back wall. It's just paved. So when the water falls, when the rain falls, and you get 3,000 millimeters of rain here or something like that, when it falls, there is nothing that is soaked up into the land. It just flows away, right? And as Prem was saying, what then happens is that the earth does not saturate with water anymore. And that has such repercussions, because what were wells? Wells, every courtyard had a well. And when the water percolates into the earth and you draw water from the the well pulls water from around and replenishes itself, and you pull more. And so you have a giving well which goes on and on and on. But now, when there's no water percolating and the water's all running off, the wells go dry. And imagine you get 3,000 millimeters of water, right, annually, of rain annually. Now, here's this thing that Prem mentioned. There is a district in India, in Rajasthan, called Jaisalmer district. It gets 100 millimeters of water. You get 3,000, 100. And the wells never go dry. The wells never go dry. Even after 22 months of drought, we sat on top of a dune, and when my friend dug into the dune 6 inches, he brought up wet sand. There is water inside the belly of these dunes. And these people who live there, they are primarily pastoralists. They know how to find water, where to find water, and they revere their wells. For them, the wells are sacred because the wells give them life. Water is life. And imagine in a place where you get hardly any rain. It rains one day a year, and it rains heavily, that whatever. They catch that water. They make catchments, they catch the water, and they store the water in these wells, or rather, it percolates in the land, and then it seeps up into the wells. And it keeps them going for 2 years if it doesn't rain. It'll still keep them going. It'll keep coming. And so again, it's not a question of, we need to get now water from a faraway river. We need to link up rivers because there's some kind of, notion of excess water in some basin and deficit water in another basin, which is all kinds of strange science, woo-woo science. But the thing is, all you need to do is just listen to the land. What is the land saying? The land is saying that if you treat me right, I will take care of you. And that's exactly what places like, not just Kerala, even Bangalore. Bangalore gets 2 times the amount of rain the whole city needs for its water consumption. And still we run out of water. And we have to get it from Kaveri, which is 140 kilometers away. It's just a mindset. It's a way of thinking. It's an ethic that we have lost.
Talking of ethics, and we talked about paving stones, those paving stones are covering up the wells that we used to have in our homes. I'm a classic example. It was an ancestral home which has been built over. And the first thing that they did was fill up the well. So when we say we don't have water, how much of it is, and who do we blame? We blame nature for this. Whereas it's us. And
climate change. Climate change is real. It's very real. But blaming everything on climate change is not useful. Only because you're never going to solve that problem, because there is a proximal cause that you have not identified, and you're blaming it on climate change. So while climate change is real, it is going to exacerbate all these misguided things you're doing on the ground. You are going to be in trouble, but we have to identify the problem correctly.
And because Arati brought up climate change, and also because I was going there anyway at some point, Arati, when you read Marginlands, you will find a beautiful description of how the pastoralists in the Thar actually manage their land. How they build a shallow bowl, how they make the sides sloping so that rain that falls wherever in that entire area comes in. I remember the first trip that she took to this area, and then she sent me this photograph. It was startling. It was a massive lake. You can't see the other end of it. It's water, and I'm seeing that in a place that was getting, like she said, 100 millimeters of rain. And that is the water that she was talking about. And Nati, I wanted to link that up with the exact polar opposite in a sense, which is the Ladakh thing, where you have climate change, you have issues with water, not just lack of water, but also where you're getting the water and when you're getting it, the seasonal issues, and the efforts that, led by, again, a good friend of yours, the efforts that people are making to solve it. And the reason for asking you that is to seed the thought that, one, we are damaging our land. Two, if you're aware of that and if you're willing to listen to the land and work with it, we can actually reverse a lot of this.
Yeah, so the Thar is a hot desert, right? Ladakh, which is in the Trans-Himalaya, it's beyond the Himalayas, is a cold desert. So the Himalayas forms a rain shadow region. So the region beyond that, which is the Tibetan Plateau, it doesn't get rain. Again, it gets only 100 millimeters, just like Thar, but it's very cold. And however, it is glacier rich. That is the womb of all our rivers. All of South Asia's rivers start on the Tibetan Plateau, except for the Ganga, which is in the Himalayas. But the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Salween, the Mekong, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, all of them start in the Tibetan Plateau. And where from? From glaciers in the Tibetan Plateau. And imagine what's happening now. Because of climate change, the glaciers are retreating. They're gone. So imagine, soon we're not going to all that perennial water source called the third pole. It's called the third pole, the roof of the world. It's going to run out of water. And that's already being seen in Ladakh. What's happened is that what happens is you have winter snow, which melts, so people use that water. And then when all that water is gone, all the snow is melted, the glaciers start melting a little bit, releasing their water, and that's used then for sowing, because that's spring, the sowing season. Now the glaciers have retreated, so that is also not, they are also not giving any water. So the sowing season, which is so important, spring, does not have any water. It's dry. And when this started happening, the local people in Ladakh started trying to look for ways to fix it. And Sonam Wangchuk, who you might have heard of, has thought of something where he said, okay, let me pipe down water from the high regions in winter and take it through a spout. Take it through a spout where in winter, when it comes out, water comes out from the spout, it freezes over. And it freezes over to make a cone, like a stupa, an ice stupa, which then serves as an water reservoir, which then can slowly melt for the farmers to use through the year. He started building this after a lot of trial and error. He started building this, and then he held a competition, and he said, all of Ladakh, let's see who can build the highest stupa. And they took it up and they started building. Now every village in Ladakh has its ice stupa, which then gives them water. But imagine, these are people with a negligible carbon footprint, and they are struggling to make ends meet through water because of what is happening in the cities, right? But they are basically they are working with the land, figuring out where the water is coming from in winter, and then piping it through and making these stupas. Now imagine if there wasn't that winter water. Like this time, there has been no snowfall in Kashmir. So basically, that very water that Sonam Wangchuk's people use to pipe is not there in Kashmir. They don't have that winter snowfall because of climate change. So while it's a stopgap measure, it's not something that anybody can rely on, unfortunately. We are shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, and one of the things that Arati keeps saying, I've heard her say this multiple times, all these disasters that happen, whether it is lack of water or lack of rainfall, unseasonal rainfall causing issues with cultivation and you name it, coastal erosion, whatever it is. Along with climate change, there's the other phrase that is used, it is natural devastation. And what Arti keeps talking about is that it's not nature that's doing this. It's not nature that devastates, I think is the
Yeah,
quote.
it's not the
I
river
wanted you
cleanse.
to explain that a little bit. Because the language we use does matter, and I want to come to language after this, but essentially there's this whole concept of, because what is happening is when we say that nature is responsible for whatever it is, we are removing agency from ourselves and transferring it to something that is beyond our scope. So nature kuch kar raha hai, what am I supposed to do about it?
Yeah.
That's the point that that you make often, and I'd like you to actually
Sure.
elaborate on that.
So every monsoon, in the newspapers, you'll say that the river Brahmaputra has flooded Assam. The river has devastated. The river has done this. The river has done that. And really, if you think about it, the Brahmaputra is supposed to flood those plains. Those are called floodplains for a reason. Every river in the monsoon floods, every river in South Asia floods, it brings silt with it, it lays down the silt on these floodplains, and that becomes the breadbasket for all these people, right? This is natural. It is welcome. It has been welcomed for eons. Yes, of course, there are, there's it's not very easy to live during that time, and there is, it's inconvenient and so on, but the farmers never doubted the fact that they need that silt for their farming, right? So these floodplains, and not only that, when the water comes down and it floods, even fish, it takes the fish into the wetlands, and then the fish spawn, and then it comes back out, and there's a whole rhythm, right? What ended up happening when the Britishers came is they wanted to protect their revenue lands. So whether it was jute or whether it was rice or whatever it was, and they started building embankments, and 4,000 kilometers of embankments were built in Assam. And embankments, what they do is they are trying to tame the river. If any of you has been to Assam, you know that the Brahmaputra is not a tameable river. The Ganga is not a tameable river. These are willful rivers. They do their own thing. Especially in monsoon, they look like oceans. They look like seas. You can't see end to end. It's like massive. And they bring silt. So now what happens is, if you build these embankments and you're trying to squeeze a river in, and it's not going to listen, it's going to burst the embankments, and it's going to go anyways. And these people will think, people who have built the embankments think it's safe to build homes on the other sides of the embankments, and they build it. And then when it bursts and it goes, it floods, and then there's casualties, and then the homes are washed away. So now who really did that? It was we who tried to tame the river, we who tried to do things against or in opposition to the basic hydrology of the region, right? And so, and oftentimes we end up blaming the river. Just like here, we'll say, oh, sea level's rising, and that's why all these houses in Valiyatura and Bhimapalli and all are falling into the sea. Not true. That's not true. So let's try and identify the problem, not try and solve for the symptom. The symptom is a flood. The symptom is this kind of erosion. But what is the real problem? We need to follow those issues back to see where we went wrong, and completely without ego, because all we need to do is fix it. And they're very easily fix some of these things, truly. But it takes.
Yeah, and when Aarti was talking about identifying problems as opposed to treating symptoms, again from her book, one of the aspects that I was thinking about was the faraka.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about the embankments. There's two parts to this issue. One part is, what do we do in the name of development? We are looking to gain something. Do we actually do a policy calculus of what do we gain versus what are we likely to lose, and are we prepared to lose this? The other is language. When somebody like an Aarti, for instance, points to how mankind's actions actually cause some of the devastation that mankind suffers from, the label that will be posted on her is she's anti-development. So now we have two camps. One camp is development, another camp is anti-development. The problem is, if somebody says, look, it is not that we need a port here, or not that we need a dam there, but these are the consequences, and are we willing to accept those consequences? We've lost the art of talking to one another, as opposed to now just putting labels on different people. Arti, I wanted you to actually talk about the Faraka because there is a history to it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it stems from the British
Yeah.
times again,
Yeah.
all the way to now, and the simple
Yeah.
solution is knock it off.
I wish. Yes. So Faraka is a dam that was built on the Ganga in West Bengal. Just when the river turns from Bihar and flows into West Bengal, there's this dam at Faraka. Now, there's a reason why this dam was built. It's very interesting. The Ganga is one of the siltiest rivers in the world, right? It's bringing down the silt from the Himalayas, and it's building these deltas like the Bengal Delta. Now, what was happening is that the port of Calcutta at that time, was getting silted up, and the British needed the port for their trade. They wanted, the ships to come through all the way into Assam and so on, because they needed these kinds of routes for their trade. So they needed to keep these ports silt free. So they said, okay, so one guy, one engineer, Arthur Cotton, he said, let's build a dam, take all the water that comes from behind it and push it through a channel so that we can flush the port out and we can take the silt out. And so the Britishers did not agree on all of that, and during the British rule, they did not build the dam. When we gained independence in 1957, again this came up and they said, okay, let's build this dam. They figured out where and so on. And they built the dam in 1971. What they did not realize is, okay, you can push the water and you can maybe flush the silt out, but this is a tidal delta. The tides come right back in, and the tides bring back 160 times the sediment that you can push out. So of course the port just stayed as it was. Now the thing was already built, the dam was already built, and what happened to all the silt that started coming from the river? It's getting accumulated behind the dam. What happens? The river water is rising. There's no place to go. Of course, it's flooding. And what's happening? It's not only flooding, it is carving up chunks and chunks and chunks of the land. There are millions of people living there. And every year they're being pushed back because the river takes away their homes, their amazing mango groves, mango orchards. Malda is famous for mango. All of that, it's just going. So imagine that one dam, because they thought maybe they can, flush the port out. They built the dam without thinking, without really looking at the basin as a whole to see if we did something here, what will happen here, right? That kind of systems thinking, that of looking at the river as a creature, as somebody that flows. So therefore, it has these connections, interconnected, dependencies. You don't think about that, then you lose it. And this now, what has happened is there's crazy flooding upstream and then downstream. That same silt which is needed to build the delta is not coming downstream. So now the delta is not being able to protect itself against rising sea levels, and therefore it is sinking. The Sundarbans, which is the mangrove forest, the largest mangrove forest, is sinking. So imagine all kinds of things, and that's 400 kilometers south of that dam. The dam was built there. 400 kilometers south, this is happening in the Sundarbans. At the dam, there's all kinds of, devastation happening. Not just that. There used to be a fantastic fish called the hilsa. I don't know if anybody has heard of the hilsa. It goes upstream to spawn, and then it comes back downstream. You build a dam, it can't go to spawn. It used to go all the way up to Allahabad, Prayagraj. Imagine. So now, Faraka to Prayagraj, there is no fisheries. It has collapsed. People have no fish over there in the river. And this used to be prime fisheries. So imagine, right? Just building that one dam, imagine how many people have been affected. And this is the most populated delta in the world. So it's all interconnectedness.
I mean, interconnectedness we are looking at as the connections that land and landscapes make with one another. So, what is happening in one place is reverberating in a different fashion and completely unexpected fashion in some other place. But also think of interconnectedness of all of this with life, with culture, with society, with everything. Aarti just brought up the Hilsa. No Bengali puja, no Bengali wedding, no Bengali festival, or no even a social gathering. This is calling friends home. If you don't serve Hilsa, it's almost insulting. It's like a Malayalam Kerala wedding without payasam. Uh, that is gone. And there are so many stories that Aarti was telling me, and one of the things that stuck in my head was consequences take time to materialize. She was telling me once about having met somebody, I think it was in Assam, going to his house and sitting on the veranda and looking out, and she can see the Ganga,
Assam Brahmaputra.
the Brahmaputra, about 500 meters away. So a logical question is, look, I mean, why are you this close to a volatile river? It turns out that when he built the house, it was 5 kilometers away,
Yeah.
which goes, yeah,
Similar to this, what Bindu, who we met in Valiyathura,
Yeah.
for example, when she bought the house, like I said, it was 5 rows of houses away from the sea,
5 rows of houses, then the beach,
and then
and
the
then
sea.
the ocean. So when we were talking to these ladies, they were telling us about. So we were asking, I mean, how did this happen? Their house is 3 rooms and a kitchen, all of which had been pretty much demolished. There was no floor. The floor had been carved away.
It was sand underneath.
Yeah,
It was
sandbags.
crazy.
So you're literally walking on sandbags, and sandbags, the minute some tidal water comes in, these things start to shift. This is how they're living. Uh, I mean, just to drive the point home, they built this house with the savings of 2 brothers. One brother working as a machinist in Dubai. When the house collapsed, these people didn't want to let that brother know. So they kept quiet. This guy, during his lunch break, was watching television. He was watching Asianet. They were talking about the floods and they were showing visuals. And he suddenly saw his house, 3 quarters collapsed. He had a heart attack. Because of that heart attack, his company decided that it was dangerous to employ him. They sent him back. He lost his job. So when we went, he was there. The father, who's ailing, he can't walk. He is lying on this bed of sand. Right? You don't, and I remember when we were standing there and talking, there was a man who came by, and typical of Kerala, he also joined in the conversation. He was telling us about all this. And we asked him, so where's your house? And he just pointed into the sea and said, it's about there.
Yep.
And this friend of yours also took her on a boat. You should tell that, actually.
Yeah. So we went to the place where his house was at. It was just in the middle of the river. In fact, even on Google, if you look for that whole village, it shows it right in the middle of the river.
A village.
And the thing is, I think what we're trying to say here is that it's not just Kerala or West Bengal or Assam or Ladakh. I mean, you see, we're naming so many places, and that's just the beginning. You can keep going. Every place has these stories.
Including
right?
Bangalore, including
Bangalore,
Chennai.
yes, yes.
Yeah, Yuvan sitting here.
Yuvan's
He was
right
telling
here,
us,
so
yeah.
he knows.
So he was talking about what's happening in Chennai. I want to turn it over to the audience and listen to the kind of questions that you guys might have about this. But before that, I wanted to ask Aarti about one other thing. This actually came up again yesterday in conversation with Yuvan. Language plays a part in this.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't answer the question.
And it plays a part in 2 ways. Earlier we spoke about how, say, calling somebody anti-development means you don't have to listen to that person, even if that person is speaking sense. Right? The other part of it is, for instance, you're sitting here in Kerala. I was mentioning the monsoons earlier. My sister, who grew up under the same set of parents, but in a different environment. For instance, I grew up here. She grew up in Chennai. My sister knows, if you ask her, when does Kerala get rain? She says, yeah, southwest monsoon, northeast monsoon. She's done. She doesn't know what a Medamara is. She doesn't know what Idavappadi is. She doesn't know the Chingyamara. She doesn't know the Kannimara. Chinni Chinni Peyyunna Chingamara, we sing songs to it. And there is a connection between this language and the rhythms of our life, right? That language is lost. And there's a lovely interstitial chapter in Arti's book called The 40 Names of Clouds. Where would you expect to see that? In the desert. Why? Because they really need to identify clouds to know which are the rain bearing ones and stuff. Arti, I wanted you to talk about that and also about how, again, it's something that came up with UN, the language that we are losing. I remember you saying Chatar Singh's sons don't know that thing. The language that you're losing, along with that, we're losing these connections, and therefore our understanding of the land, our respect for the land, all of that.
You know, they say that if you, the first thing you do when you identify something is you give it a name, right? You give it some kind of, some way that you can remember, or you make it distinct from this to the other. These names, like Prem mentioned, in the desert where they don't even have 40 cloudy days, they have 40 names for clouds, right? This is what Barry Lopez calls the voice memory of a land. When you're on a land, you're able to tell that this is where I can launch a boat from. I cannot launch it from here because I know a certain kind of shoal is there here and a certain kind of shoal is not there here. You know, that kind of understanding of the land, that kind of naming of the land. And by the way, these fishermen here, there's a wonderful little book where they go out to fish, father and son, and they have so many names for the different tides that come in. You know, it's not just a tide. We call it high tide, low tide. That's about it. But there are so many different names for tides. These fishermen here in Kerala can actually tell which is a tide at which you can launch, what kind of operation, what you shouldn't do, when it comes, what time it comes, everything. There's a knowledge of the land, and it is very local. You tell these same guys to go and know this in Gujarat, they won't do it, because this is a very hyper local knowledge. And this understanding of local geography and being able to describe it with words is so important, because then you can actually stand up against an interloper who comes in and says, I want this land because we'll just move you to this other place. I want this land for something else of mine. And this other place is just as good. Wo bhi beach hai, ye bhi beach hai, this also beach, that's also beach. It's the same thing. But it's not, right? And you will not know it's not unless you actually know it. So all of us, in fact, who have grown up in, speaking for myself, grown up in a city, I don't have that kind of knowledge. But there are people who do. And there are people then who know that, no, this has to be protected because this is a certain way, this land behaves a certain way. And this, is a different way that you have to be. You can't build here, you can build here, things like that, All kinds of understanding of local geographies is important, just so that we know and we don't take decisions like what we did in Faraka. Coming down to language, even in terms of our own way of saying it, I don't know how it is in Malayalam, I don't know Malayalam, but say in Hindi, when you call somebody an ullu, it's a pejorative. An ullu is a...
One of the things about being friends with us, I once accidentally said somebody was blind as a bat, and she yelled at me.
No, blind as a bat in a pejorative way. A bat, maybe the fact that it uses echolocation, but it's just that you call somebody a gadha. You call them a donkey in English, in a pejorative way. But really, I have walked 600 kilometers with a donkey, and I know that a donkey is an intelligent creature, hardworking creature, right? So the thing is that let's use language, or let's find ways to push back against incorrectly used language, incorrectly used words. For example, drain the swamp, or the swamp as a bad thing. All of Hollywood is like that. It thinks of it like that. Why even, I think, Donald Trump, I'm coming to that. Donald Trump even had drained the swamp as a kind of slogan, right? Political slogan to say, take away all the unsavory creatures from Washington. A swamp is the most productive ecosystem in the world, and it sequesters more carbon than any rainforest, right? There's so much that we seem to not understand just because we are using a language in a certain way, right? And then that brings me to what Prem just kind of seeded, wasteland. In India, we have a wasteland atlas of India, where scrublands, anything that is not forest, not cities, and not agricultural land is called wasteland. So you have amazing ecosystems which are labeled wastelands. Riverine, that is on the side of the river, the land, the little patches of, the shores of the river, that's also wasteland. And when you call something wasteland, it's so easy for someone to come and say, let's just build here, let's take it over, do something else. When really these ecosystems are what guarantee food and water security. You go to Kutch and you'll see that there are these amazing, they call it a certain, they have a name for it, grasslands, which are, because of them, there is water in that region, and there's so much water in that region. But it's going to be taken over for something else because it has been labeled wasteland. So again, and who's to stand up, right? Who's to stand up and say that this is not wasteland? It is us, and I think it behooves us to then do that homework, to be able to say, no. And I'm not saying you go to Kutch and do it. Here only, wherever you stay, as long as you know, and for example, even Chennai, right? You build over the wetlands and then you say, oh my God, it's flooded every monsoon. Same happens in Bangalore, in a place where I stay. Amazing lakes which have been thought out from the 15th century, 16th century, have been built over by our builders, and it floods when it rains. And this time it flooded in such a way that Mercedes and Audis and everything were underwater because there was all swanky communities that have been built. But why? Because you just did not understand the land and you allowed anything to happen at any time, right? So I think it behooves us to stand, to first know what we are on. What is this land we're standing on? And then stand for it. And if we do that, use the right words. Don't call it barren. Don't call it banjar zameen. A desert is not banjar zameen. A desert is full of life and it's full of water, right? There's a lot of stuff that we don't know. And so that kind of understanding of local geographies is, I feel, and again, see, if you notice that this has got nothing to do with any one political party or anything, it's not one corporation or anything. It's just the way, it's our mindset, and we need to reclaim that ethic, that thing of knowing what the local geography is, does, looks like, should be, and has always been. And if we can fight for that, a lot of these issues that we are seeing, we're not going to have.
Actually, I'm glad she brought that up, because one of the things that I've noticed, mercifully, that is changing now. Books on nature, environment, and all that are being read in increasing numbers. Arati's book, by the way, has just gone into its third printing, and the paperback, I think, has just come out and stuff. I would never have expected this to happen 10, 15 years ago, that a book on nature and on Marginlands would do that well. It's nice that people are reading it. I think more people need to read it, because otherwise we distance ourselves from problems. Yuvan was telling me yesterday about the Ennur gas leak and how they're trying to... I read the news and I'm like, oh, okay, there is a gas leak in Ennur. It's like, okay, there was Union Carbide in Bhopal sometime back or whatever. It's not. It's actually affecting us, which is why books like this are important, and I'm glad you wrote it. Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to turn it over to the audience. Questions, comments, observations.
I just wanted to know, when people tell you their villages are deep in the ocean after erosion, how are they living now? Are they still fisher folk, or maybe they're migrants? I don't know. What are
Very
some
good
stories?
question.
Yeah.
So, for example, the stuff that has happened in Faraka, the villages on the sides of the rivers, all the men have migrated. Only women and children are left, and they are rolling beedies for a living. They don't have any schools, they don't have any hospitals. It's terrible. The men have come off to Bombay and Delhi and places like that to work, and they don't make enough to send back. So what has then happened is, because they have children, the children come of marriageable age, and there is even before they come of marriageable age, there's child marriage happening, rampant child labor, and all of these things will percolate down into society, right? When you lose your house, you lose your belongings, and you're forced to live on the streets, then you know that this is not going to be, it's going to be desperation. So, and this is just one example, and everywhere I've seen, it's just that cascading effect that Prem talked about.
Actually, to your question again, that family that we met over here, we were asking them, why were you living in a house which is 3/4 demolished, and the 1/4 that remains is just sand as a flooring. You know what they told us? That when the house started to collapse, they were taken to shelter. Right? It was one of those schools. They said they didn't want to live there because what happens is there's nothing for people to do, right? So the women are sitting there cooking collectively for everybody. The men in the evening go to the nearest toddy shop, come back drunk, and drunk man, young women, you know what happens. So for them, the fear of what would happen in that rescue home or rescue area drove them back to live in a house. She actually told us this when we, one of the last things she said is, will you come back again next year? And we said yes. Unfortunately, COVID stopped us. But what she said was, we don't know if we'll be here next year, but take my number and call and I'll come to wherever you are. That's the life that they live. I mean, you don't know if you're going to have a roof over your head.
People are recently, I mean, you talked about being called anti-developmental, but even if that works in a way, you know, in the future we stop certain things from happening which are like detrimental to our future and the future of the ecosystem. What would you say about undoing the damage that hundreds of years of you know, our activities have done? Or could you give any examples of that?
Yeah. So again, right. Yeah. So I was going to give an example of Elva, and it's not from India. So hopefully at some point, you know, those kinds of undoing will also start happening in India. But there was a dam in Oregon called, in the state of Washington in the US called Elva. And it was very much like Faraka. It also had a salmon that used to go up to spawn, and then it got, you know, couldn't go anymore and so on. It destroyed a lot of things. The local economy got destroyed. And the Native American tribes that lived in that valley, they rose up and they fought for years. And finally, that dam came down. And the government put into place an actual study of seeing how the ecosystem comes back. And it took years, but it came back, and now the salmon has started swimming again. So there is a way of bringing those things back. Again, it needs will, political will, and corporate will also. But there has to be that first step of first identifying that this is not, it's not about anti-national. It'll actually be good for the nation if something like this were to happen.
I'm glad you asked that question, because along with the two things that Arati said, political will, corporate will, etc., there's also public opinion. And one of the reasons why I keep insisting that people should read about these issues is that you need to understand the damage that we are doing to ourselves. Once you understand, you need to make your voice heard. For example, even these sea walls, we know what the problem is. We know what the damage is that is being caused. But I've actually sat and watched a political meeting where a very famous politician, I don't want to name him, but it could be any politician, has actually said, I am taking care of your needs. I will build that sea wall that is missing from here. He's exactly doing what he's not supposed to be doing. And nobody is speaking up because there isn't an awareness that this is actually what is causing the problem. So the first step starts from us understanding, then standing up, speaking out,